The three albino hatchlings pressed themselves into the far corner of the containment unit, their bodies trembling under the cold white lights of Cultivation Station 09. Their scales were completely white, not the beautiful emerald green that every drachmer was supposed to have. They looked like ghosts compared to the other hatchlings in the facility. The smallest one was barely bigger than a house cat. When the facility technician stepped closer with his scanning device, that little hatchling did something that surprised everyone watching. It launched itself forward with a piercing shriek that echoed off the metal walls. Its tiny mouth opened wide, showing rows of needle-sharp teeth that gleamed in the harsh light. The technician jumped back so fast he almost dropped his equipment. "Crazy little thing nearly bit me," he complained, shaking his hand even though the hatchling hadn't touched him. Vector, the station director, stood behind the observation glass. His own scales were a deep, rich green that marked him as pure drachmer bloodline. He looked at the three albino hatchlings like someone might look at spoiled food. "Aggressive little monsters," he said, his voice cold and final. "No one will ever want them. Schedule them for termination. Friday morning. That gives us 3 days to finish the paperwork." The other staff members in the observation room nodded and made notes on their devices. This was normal procedure. It happened every few years when albino hatchlings appeared in a clutch. No one questioned it. No one except the young human woman standing quietly in the back. Dr. Riley Brooks gripped her tablet so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had only been on the station for 3 weeks. This was her first real job after spending 6 years studying xenobiology, learning about alien species from dozens of different worlds. She had dreamed about this opportunity her whole life. She had imagined discovering new species, learning how different creatures communicated, maybe even making friends with aliens who thought differently than humans. She had not imagined watching 3 baby animals get marked for death because they were born the wrong color. The other researchers were already walking away, heading back to their labs to work on other projects. There were hundreds of drachmer hatchlings in the facility. These 3 albinos were just a mistake, a genetic error that needed to be corrected. Everyone seemed to accept this as fact. Everyone except Riley. "They're just scared," she said, but her voice came out so quietly that almost no one heard her. Her supervisor did though. Thorn was a Vaxillian, which meant he stood almost 8 feet tall and had 4 arms and a face that looked like it was made of hard, dark plates. When he turned to look down at Riley, his mandibles clicked together in a way that meant he was annoyed. "Dr. Brooks," he said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "They are genetically inferior. Every test we have done shows this. Albinism in drachmer does not just change their color. It results in sensory defects, aggression problems, and the inability to integrate into drachmer society. The drachmer have been culling these mutations for 10,000 years. That is longer than human civilization has existed. Who are we to question their wisdom?" Riley wanted to argue, but she was new. She was the youngest researcher on the station. She had no authority here. Still, she could not stop watching those 3 hatchlings through the glass. They were huddling together now that the technician had left. The largest one, probably only a few days older than the others, had positioned itself in front of the 2 smaller ones. It was trying to protect them. Its body was tense, ready to fight anything that came close. But it was the eyes that got to Riley. All 3 hatchlings had pale silver eyes instead of the golden eyes that normal drachmer possessed. And those eyes were not filled with aggression like Vector claimed. Riley had grown up with dogs and cats. She had volunteered at animal shelters throughout high school and college. She knew what scared animals looked like. These hatchlings were terrified. "Who are we?" Riley repeated Thorn's question, but this time her voice was stronger. "We're scientists. We're supposed to question everything. That is literally our job." Thorn's mandibles clicked again, faster this time. "Your job, Dr. Brooks, is to follow established protocols. The drachmer are a respected species with millennia of experience with their own kind. We document. We observe. We do not interfere with cultural practices." Riley bit her lip to keep from saying what she was really thinking. The observation room had emptied now. It was just her and Thorn and the 3 small creatures behind the glass who had no idea that their lives would end in 3 days. "Yes, sir," Riley finally said. Thorn nodded and walked away, his footsteps heavy on the metal floor. Riley stayed where she was. She watched the 3 albino hatchlings. The largest one was grooming the smallest one now, its tongue carefully cleaning the pale scales. It was such a gentle action, so different from the aggressive monster behavior everyone kept talking about. Riley pulled up the facility schedule on her tablet. She looked at the security protocols, the access codes, the timing of the night shift patrols. That night, alone in her small quarters on the station, Riley made a decision. She did not know if it would work. She did not know if it would cost her everything she had worked for. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was not going to let those 3 hatchlings die without at least trying to understand them first. Friday morning was 3 days away. That gave her 3 nights. Would have to be enough. Riley sat at her workstation for 3 hours that first night, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She was not a hacker. She had never broken a rule in her entire life. In school she was the kid who reminded the teacher about homework. But here she was, trying to crack the security override for a restricted containment unit. Her heart hammered in her chest as she typed in the final code sequence. The screen flashed green. Access granted. She glanced at the time display on her tablet. 3 in the morning. The night shift security patrol had just passed her section. She had maybe 20 minutes before they circled back around. Riley grabbed the small backpack she had prepared and walked quickly through the empty corridors. Her footsteps sounded too loud in the silence. Every shadow made her jump. When she finally reached the containment unit, she had to stop and take 3 deep breaths before pressing her hand to the access panel. The door hissed open. 3 pairs of silver eyes locked onto her instantly. The largest hatchling, the one who had tried to protect the others, pushed himself up on his back legs. His mouth opened and a sharp hiss filled the small room. Every single one of his needle-like teeth was on display. Riley's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to move slowly. She sat down on the cold metal floor, crossing her legs like she used to do in kindergarten. "Hey," she said softly, keeping her voice calm even though her pulse was racing. "I'm not going to hurt you. I promise." The hatchlings just stared at her. Their bodies were tense, ready to run or fight. The largest one, Riley decided to call him Ash because of his pale gray-white coloring, kept himself between her and the 2 smaller ones. Riley reached into her backpack and pulled out her dinner. It was just a simple sandwich she had saved from the cafeteria. She unwrapped it slowly, making sure they could see everything she was doing. Then she took a bite, chewing normally, showing them it was food. The hatchlings watched every movement. Riley tore off a small piece of the sandwich. She tossed it gently toward them, making sure it landed about halfway between them and her. Then she sat still and waited. Nobody moved. "It's chicken," Riley said conversationally, like she was talking to friends. "Well, it's synthetic chicken. They make it in labs now. But it tastes pretty good. I mean, it's not as good as real chicken from Earth, but it's not bad." She waited. 5 minutes passed. The sandwich piece sat there on the floor. 10 minutes. Riley's legs were starting to fall asleep. 15 minutes. She was starting to think this was a terrible idea. Then the smallest hatchling moved. It was so tiny compared to the other 2. Riley mentally named her Frost because her scales were almost pure white, lighter even than the others. Frost moved forward 1 slow inch at a time. Her silver eyes never left Riley's face. When she got close to the sandwich piece, she paused, sniffed it once, then darted forward so fast Riley almost missed it. Frost snatched the food in her jaws and shot back to her siblings. She swallowed it in 1 gulp. Riley grinned. "There you go. See? Not so bad, right?" She left another piece of sandwich on the floor when she finally had to leave that night. The security patrol would be coming soon. Riley came back the next night. And the night after that. And the night after that. By the 3rd night, Ash stopped hissing when she entered. By the 5th night, all 3 hatchlings were taking food directly from her hands. Their sharp little teeth would carefully take the offered pieces, never once biting her fingers. By the 7th night, something amazing happened. Riley sat down like she always did, and the medium-sized hatchling, the one she had named Pale for his silvery white scales, actually walked over to her. He sniffed her leg, then her hand, then he climbed right into her lap and curled up. Riley barely dared to breathe. Very slowly, very gently, she lifted her hand and stroked the top of his head. His scales were smooth and cool under her fingertips. "You're not defective," Riley whispered, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "You're just different. And there's nothing wrong with being different." On the 8th night, Riley opened the containment door and found the lights already on. Thorn stood there, all 8 feet of him, his forearms crossed over his chest. His mandibles were clicking rapidly, which Riley had learned meant he was very angry. "Dr. Brooks?" His voice was cold and hard. "What in the name of the Galactic Council do you think you are doing?" Riley stood up quickly. The 3 hatchlings immediately pressed against her legs, their bodies warm and solid against her. Ash positioned himself in front, ready to defend her. That small action gave Riley courage. "I'm filing for adoption," she said, lifting her chin. "Under Human Diplomatic Code 47B. It covers cultural exchange of xenofauna." Thorn's mandibles stopped clicking. He stared at her. "You cannot be serious." "I'm completely serious," Riley said. She pulled out her tablet and showed him the form she had already filled out. "It's my right as a human citizen working in diplomatic space. I'm requesting custody of these 3 hatchlings." The news spread through the station faster than a computer virus. By morning it had reached the galactic networks. By afternoon it was trending across 72 different worlds. The hashtag #HumanAdoptsRejects was everywhere. Aliens from hundreds of species were commenting, sharing, arguing about it. Most of them thought Riley was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Many were concerned for her safety. Several thought it was hilarious. A few thought it was touching. The Galactic Council reviewed her request. It took 3 days of debate. But finally the approval came through. Riley could keep the hatchlings. Most of the council members voted yes for one simple reason. They did not actually believe Riley would survive a full year with 3 dangerous, albino drachmer. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. 6 months had passed since Riley brought the 3 albino hatchlings to the human research outpost on Station Kepler 22. She stood in the middle of her laboratory, looking at the mess surrounding her, and let out a long, tired sigh. This was the 3rd time this week. Ash had knocked over 3 specimen containers while chasing Frost around the room. Glass and colored liquids were splattered across the floor. Pale had somehow figured out how to override the electronic door controls again, and he had let himself into the equipment storage room where he definitely was not supposed to be. And apparently, all 3 of them had decided that 4 in the morning was the perfect time for what Riley could only describe as the zoom eyes. That wild, chaotic energy where they just had to run and jump and crash into things. "I know you guys are bored," Riley said, running her hand through her messy hair. She had not slept well in days. "But we really have to work on impulse control." Ash made a chirping sound at her. It was a noise she had learned over the past months. It meant he was sorry but not really sorry enough to promise it would not happen again. He was now the size of a large dog, maybe a golden retriever or a German shepherd. His pale scales had started showing the distinctive ridge patterns that marked adolescent drachmer. He was not a tiny hatchling anymore. Frost and Pale were not far behind in size either. Riley knelt down and started picking up the broken glass with a magnetic sweeper. She had bought 3 of these devices in the last month alone. The laboratory door slid open and her colleague Tyler Ward stuck his head in. His eyes went wide when he saw the chaos. "Everything okay in here?" "I heard crashing sounds from 2 corridors away." Riley looked up at him from the floor where she was kneeling in a puddle of spilled specimen fluid. "Define okay," she muttered. Tyler stepped inside, carefully avoiding the broken glass. "You know, the other researchers are starting a betting pool on how long before those 3 actually—" He stopped talking suddenly. All 3 hatchlings had moved. They positioned themselves directly between Tyler and Riley. Their body language changed in an instant. Their backs straightened. Their tails went rigid. Their silver eyes locked onto Tyler with an intensity that made him take a step backward. "Whoa," Tyler said, raising his hands. "I'm not a threat." "Easy," Riley said gently, standing up. She walked over and placed her hand on Ash's head. "Tyler is a friend. He works with us, remember?" The 3 hatchlings relaxed a little bit, but they did not move away. They stayed between Riley and Tyler like a living barrier. That was when Riley understood something important. This was not aggression. This was not the dangerous, violent behavior that everyone had warned her about. Her 3 companions were not attacking. They were protecting her. They saw Tyler as a potential threat to Riley, and they had moved to defend her. "It's okay," Riley said softly to all 3 of them. "You can relax now." Slowly, one by one, they moved away from their defensive positions. But Ash kept glancing back at Tyler just to make sure. Over the next several months, Riley threw herself into studying her 3 companions. She was not just keeping them alive anymore. She was trying to understand them. Really understand them. She discovered that Frost had incredibly sensitive hearing. Loud noises made her panic and lash out, not because she was aggressive but because the sound actually hurt her. When Riley tested her hearing range, she found that Frost could detect frequencies that most species could not even register. Once Riley understood this, she made sure to keep the laboratory quiet and warn Frost before any loud noises happened. Ash's so-called aggression had a pattern too. It spiked when he felt trapped or confined in small spaces. He needed room to move. When Riley gave him more space and made sure he always had a clear path to escape any situation, his aggressive episodes dropped by 90%. And Pale turned out to be remarkably intelligent. Riley started giving him puzzles to solve, the kind that were designed for fully grown adult drachmer. Pale figured them out faster than the adults did in the recorded tests. He could navigate complex mazes, solve logic problems, and even seemed to understand basic mathematical patterns. One evening, Riley was watching Pale work through a particularly difficult maze she had designed. Tyler stood beside her, both of them observing through the observation glass. Pale reached the end of the maze in just under 4 minutes. The average adult Drachmer took 12 minutes to complete the same maze. "They're not broken," Riley said quietly, more to herself than to Tyler. "They're just wired differently. And nobody ever bothered to figure them out before just throwing them away." Tyler shook his head in amazement. "You know, the Galactic Xenobiology Conference is coming up in 3 months. You should present this research. This is groundbreaking stuff, Riley." Riley laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Right. So the entire galaxy can watch me stand on a stage and prove that humans are naive idiots who keep dangerous pets? That sounds like a great idea." Tyler was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Or maybe you stand on that stage and prove that the galaxy has been completely wrong for 10,000 years. Maybe you show them that throwing away individuals just because they're different is not just cruel, it's stupid. Think about how many brilliant minds have been lost because they didn't fit into the right box." Riley looked through the glass at her 3 companions. They were not tiny, helpless hatchlings anymore. They were magnificent young Drachmer in their own right. Ash noticed her watching and walked over to the glass. He met her gaze and made a low rumbling sound deep in his chest. Riley had learned what that sound meant. It meant trust. It meant family. It meant home. "Yeah," Riley finally said, making her decision. "Maybe we will present. Maybe it's time the galaxy learned something new." The Galactic Xenobiology Conference on Station Unity was the biggest event in the entire field of alien biology. Scientists from 300 different worlds attended. When Riley walked into the massive exhibition hall with Ash, Frost, and Pale following calmly behind her, every single conversation stopped. The silence was so complete you could have heard a pin drop. The 3 albino Drachmer were not babies anymore. They stood nearly 6 feet tall at the shoulder, their bodies powerful and graceful. Their pale scales caught the light and seemed to shimmer like pearls. As they walked behind Riley, their movements were synchronized and calm. Every single eye in that enormous room tracked them. Riley could feel her hands shaking, but she kept walking toward the presentation platform. She spotted the Drachmer delegation immediately. They were impossible to miss with their brilliant emerald scales. Their leader, High Curator Velshera, sat in the front row. The expression on her face was clear even from a distance. Disdain. Pure, undisguised contempt. The conference moderator, a nervous Centauri named Kip, approached Riley with hesitant steps. His antennae were twitching wildly, which Riley knew meant he was anxious. "Dr. Brooks," he began, his voice cracking slightly, "perhaps you should secure your specimens? For safety? We have cages prepared backstage if you need them." Riley stopped walking and turned to face him. "They're not specimens," she said calmly, though her heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone could probably hear it. "They're my colleagues. And they're about to demonstrate something remarkable." A murmur ran through the crowd. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Riley walked onto the platform. Ash, Frost, and Pale followed her without any leashes or restraints. She had spent 6 months training them, understanding them, learning how they thought and communicated. Now it was time to show the galaxy what they could really do. "We'll start with spatial reasoning," Riley announced. She activated the holographic puzzle display. Complex geometric shapes appeared in the air. "Ash," Riley said simply. The large albino Drachmer stepped forward. His silver eyes studied the puzzle for maybe 3 seconds. Then he began touching the shapes with his clawed hand, rotating them, fitting them together. The puzzle that typically took adult Drachmer 12 minutes to solve was completed in 42 seconds. The crowd gasped. "Now scent identification," Riley said. She opened a case containing 18 different sealed containers. Frost moved to the containers gracefully. She sniffed each one carefully, then used her claw to sort them into groups. Chemical compounds, organic materials, synthetic substances, hazardous materials. Every single categorization was correct. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. "And finally, system integration," Riley said. Pale approached the main terminal. Riley had gotten special permission for this demonstration. Pale's eyes seemed to unfocus slightly as he interfaced directly with the station's AI system. On every screen in the facility, complex traffic flow patterns appeared. Station Unity handled thousands of ships every day. Pale had just optimized the entire system, a task that normally required a team of 6 trained engineers working for hours. He did it in 90 seconds. The crowd went completely silent again. Then one person started clapping. Then another. Then another. Within moments, the entire exhibition hall erupted in thunderous applause. Scientists from hundreds of different species were on their feet, applauding. Riley felt tears prick at her eyes. Her 3 companions had just proven themselves to the entire galaxy. That was when the alarm started blaring. Chemical fire in Section 7, the station's AI announced, its voice calm but urgent. All personnel evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. The applause turned to panic instantly. Hundreds of delegates started pushing toward the exits. Riley could see the problem immediately. Too many people were trying to squeeze through doorways that were automatically sealing to contain the fire. A bottleneck was forming. People were shoving, pushing, trampling each other. Riley did not think. She just acted. Ash, she shouted over the chaos. Door protocols. Now. The massive albino drachma charged toward the jammed emergency exit where at least 50 people were crushed together, unable to move. With one powerful strike of his shoulder, Ash broke through the safety mechanism that had malfunctioned. The door sprang open. People poured through to safety. Frost. Find them. Frost's nostrils flared as she took in the air. Her incredibly sensitive nose could detect things no other species could. She suddenly darted toward a sealed section of the hall. Riley could hear screaming coming from behind a collapsed panel. Frost had located 5 delegates trapped behind debris that no one else even knew about. Pale. Coordinate. Pale's eyes flickered as he dove back into the station's AI system. Within seconds he had mapped every blocked corridor, every sealed door, every safe evacuation route. The maps appeared on every screen in the facility, guiding panicked delegates to safety. Riley worked alongside her 3 companions, helping people, giving commands, coordinating the rescue. They worked together like they had trained for this their entire lives. When the smoke finally cleared and the fire suppression systems had done their job, Riley stood in the exhibition hall covered in soot and exhaustion. 17 lives had been saved. 3 of those lives belonged to members of the Drachma delegation who had come specifically to watch Riley fail. High Curator Velshera approached slowly. Her brilliant emerald scales were dulled with ash and shame. She stopped in front of Riley and bowed her head, a gesture of deep respect in Drachma culture. We have been mistaken, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. For 10,000 years, we have been terribly, terribly mistaken. 1 year had passed since the Galactic Xenobiology Conference. Riley stood in the main hall of the sanctuary for rejected xenofauna, watching the afternoon light stream through the massive windows. The facility sprawled across the peaceful moon of Tranquility 7, with wide open spaces and specialized habitats for dozens of different species. Ash, Frost, and Pale lounged nearby in a patch of sunlight. They were fully grown now, magnificent creatures standing nearly 8 feet tall. Their pale scales had developed patterns over the past year that no one had seen before. Scientists from across the galaxy were studying them, making discoveries every day. The albino coloring was not a defect at all. It actually provided better heat dissipation than normal scales. Their enhanced sensory reception allowed them to detect things other drachma missed completely. And their neural plasticity, their ability to learn and adapt, far exceeded that of typical drachma. The Drachma Council had issued a formal public apology 6 months ago. It had been broadcast across every major network in the galaxy. They admitted they had been wrong. They had been destroying their own species' most gifted members for 10,000 years, all because of prejudice and tradition. New policies were enacted immediately across all Drachma territory. Not a single albino hatchling would ever be culled again. In fact, albino drachma were now being recognized as a specialized variant with unique and valuable capabilities. Families who produced albino offspring were no longer shamed. They were celebrated. But the changes had gone far beyond just one species. Riley received reports every week about other civilizations reviewing their own practices. The Zentari were reconsidering their treatment of multi-limbed hatchlings. The Vaxillians were studying offspring born with sensory differences. The Krell had stopped their culling programs entirely, choosing instead to study the variations they had once eliminated. The galaxy was slowly, finally learning something that humans had understood for a very long time. Being different did not mean being deficient. It just meant being different. Riley's sanctuary now housed 43 residents. 43 creatures who had been rejected, abandoned, or scheduled for termination by their own species. They came from 17 different worlds. And every single one of them was thriving under Riley's care. Her communicator suddenly chimed with an incoming message. Riley pulled it from her pocket and opened the file. It was a video message from the Rigel system, halfway across the galaxy. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to a young Zentari girl. She looked maybe 12 years old in human terms. Her antennae were drooping, a sign of deep distress in her species. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Dr. Brooks, my name is Kessa. I don't know if you'll even see this message, but I had to try. My little brother hatched 3 weeks ago. He has 6 limbs instead of 4. The elders in our colony say he must be removed before he brings dishonor to our family line. But I've seen what you did for those Drachmer hatchlings. I've watched the videos 100 times. Please, if there's any way, do you have room for one more friend that nobody wants? His name is Pip, and he's the sweetest little thing. He doesn't deserve to die just because he's different. The girl's voice broke on the last word. The video ended. Riley felt her throat tighten. She looked over at Ash, who had been with her from the very beginning. The massive albino Drachmer lifted his head and met her gaze. He made that deep rumbling sound in his chest that Riley had learned meant approval, trust, and family all rolled into one. Always, Riley whispered, her fingers already moving to compose a response. We always have room. The door to the main hall slid open and Carter walked in, carrying a stack of supply reports. He saw Riley's face and immediately knew. Another one? Another one, Riley confirmed, and despite everything she was smiling. Carter shook his head, but he was smiling too. You know, at this rate you're going to change the entire galaxy. Riley looked around at her sanctuary. She saw creatures who had been condemned but were now flourishing. She saw the 3 albino Drachmer who had started this whole journey. She looked down at the message from a desperate girl halfway across the galaxy who still had hope when she should have had none. Maybe, Riley said softly. But I'm not doing it alone. Ash rumbled his approval again. Frost made her chirping sound, the one that meant she was happy. Pale tilted his head thoughtfully, studying Riley with those intelligent silver eyes. Through the massive windows, Riley could see a transport ship landing on the facility's docking pad. She had already sent the coordinates before Carter even walked in. The ship would depart for the Rigel system within the hour. The galaxy had rejected them all. Every single creature in this sanctuary had been deemed worthless, defective, unworthy of life. But a human had asked for friends instead of perfection. And one by one, life by life, everything was changing. Riley sent her response to Kessa. Pack your brother carefully. I'm sending a ship. Welcome to the family. Outside the stars were shining. Somewhere out there, a little Zentari boy with 6 limbs instead of 4 was about to get a second chance at life. And that made all the difference.